Today we're going to be in Ecclesiastes chapter 8, and thus far, most of the content that Solomon has given us has been uh, related to these kind of, I've been calling them case studies. So he has some observations, he observes something in culture, and then he discusses sort of its meaning. And this is one of the points where he stops this pattern and there's kind of a practical interlude. He's had a couple of these interspersed. I haven't drawn too much attention to them, but we'll spend more time just focusing on it because the entire chapter is this interlude where he's breaking from this normal pattern and he's providing some interpretation and meaning to all of the stuff that he says. I'm sure we're all aware of what's happening in our world right now, in the States right now, and regarding the riots and the cause of the riots and everything else. And so I actually think there's a lot of great words of wisdom that speak to this today in this chapter. So let me see, I'll share my screen here. Okay, go ahead and share. All right, so this is chapter 8. A good name is better than precious ointment, and the day of death than the day of birth. It is better to go to the house of mourning than to the house of feasting, for this is the end of all mankind, and the living will lay it to heart. Sorrow is better than laughter, for by sadness of face the heart is made glad. The heart of the wise is in the house of mourning, but the heart of fools is in the house of mirth. It is better for a man to hear the rebuke of the wise than to hear the songs. For as the crackling of thorns under the pot, so is the laughter of the fools. This also is vanity. Surely oppression drives the wise into madness, and a bribe corrupts the heart. Better is the end of a thing than its beginning, and the patient in spirit is better than the proud in spirit. Be not quick in your spirit to become angry, for anger lodges in the heart of fools. Say not, why were the former days better than these? For it is not from wisdom that you ask this. Wisdom is good with an inheritance, an advantage to those who see the sun. For the protection of wisdom is like the protection of money, and the advantage of knowledge is that wisdom preserves the life of him who has it. Consider the work of God, who can make straight what he has made crooked. In the day of prosperity be joyful, and in the day of adversity consider God has made the one as well as the other, so that man may not find out anything that will be after him. In my vain life I have seen everything. There's a righteous man who perishes in his righteousness. There's a wicked man who prolongs his life in his evil doing. Be not overly righteous, and do not make yourself too wise. Why should you destroy yourself? Be not overly wicked, neither be a fool. Why should you die before your time? It is good that you should take hold of this, and from that withhold not your hand, for the one who fears God shall come out from them both. Wisdom gives strength to the wise man, more than 10 rulers who are in the city. Surely there is not a righteous man on earth who does good and never sins. Do not take to heart all things that people say, lest you hear your servant cursing you. Your heart knows how many times you yourself have cursed others. All this I have tested by wisdom. I said, I will be wise, but it was far from me. That which has been far off and deep, very deep, who can find it out? I turned my heart to know and to search out and to seek wisdom and the scheme of things, and to know the wickedness of folly and the foolishness that is madness. And I find something more bitter than death. The woman whose heart is snares and nets, whose hands are fetters. He who pleases God escapes her, but the sinner is taken by her. Behold, this is what I have found, said the preacher, while adding one thing to another to find the scheme of things, which my soul has sought repeatedly, but I have not found. One man among 1,000 I found, but a woman among all those I have not found. See, this alone I found, that God has made man upright, but they have sought out many schemes. So he starts this chapter, this interlude, with 6 maxims. So a maxim is like a short, pithy statement or a proverb. The first one is a good name is better than precious ointment, or some translations might say precious oil. that might seem a little odd to us, but in this culture, oil is used for many things, and oil is it's a refined product. And so in a time where refinement is for the rich, uh, oils, perfumes, the kinds of things that oils were used in were very, very expensive. Um, and so you can see this in the story of Jesus with uh, Mary in the alabaster box. She breaks the box and puts the ointment over Jesus' feet, and all the disciples are, amazed, or really more dismayed at this display. So this is where that reference is coming from, is in this part of the world that's a very difficult thing to come by, something that's this finely processed. um, but with all these maxims, they're not, I don't believe they're teaching six unique things. I think they're kind of like different facets of the same diamond. And so he's gone through all of these case studies that we've been focusing on, and I feel like he's kind of sitting back and trying to make heads or tails of it, right? What's the pattern between all of the cases, and how does he understand it? And it seems like in these six maxims, he's embracing sadness. He's embracing grief. And so there's these various ways that the opposite of grief is expressed in culture. And he's saying to take the grief side of things, the sadness side of things, is better than to take the happy joy side of things. I feel like for our culture in particular, as Westerners, this is very counterintuitive, countercultural for us, because particularly in the younger generations, everything is instant gratification. We want what we want, and we want it now. I'm a big Amazon user. I haven't gone to a store to go shopping, and I don't even know how long. Years probably, except for the occasional, when Christy asked me to go pick something up at the store. So for me, Amazon slowing their shipping down during this time has just been almost enough to send me back to regular stores. Not quite enough, but almost enough. But so our culture, and particularly as things get faster and faster and faster, and the expectation is that it becomes faster and faster. Now people are sending packages so quickly, and you can track them so much better than you used to. If you buy something and Amazon ships it, they actually show you where your package is on a map. And so when it's out for delivery, it will say your package is 3 stops away, your package is 2 stops away. So our expectation is that, from this little device right here that we all carry around in our pockets, I should be able to know everything that is knowable. I should be able to contact everyone that is contactable. And so the idea that I would lean away from instant gratification in our culture, in my culture, is ridiculous. It is better in our culture to go, no, let's embrace the fun. Let's enjoy ourselves. Let's not think about saving for the future, setting aside money, building in disciplines, all of that kind of thing. And so Solomon's wisdom here is fairly countercultural and to our own culture. And so he says that the day of death is better than the day of birth. Why? How can you make heads or tails of that? Why would you think he would say the day of death is better than the day of birth? Any takers?
It's finished. You don't have to worry about anything anymore.
Yeah. A birth is an exciting thing, but who's a baby? A baby's no one. They haven't done anything. They haven't experienced anything. I think of, my grandfather. And he's not an important man by society standards, but I just think of the number of things he's experienced and witnessed and lived through and observed and accomplished in his life. His day of death is better than the day of birth, where none of this has been accomplished. His next maxim is, it's better to go to the house of mourning than the house of feasting. Um, and his justification is, the end of all mankind is, presumably death. Thus, why should this be any different? So why do you think he would say the house of mourning is better than the house of feasting?
Well, if you go to a house where there's a party going on, you're just one more person who's taken from the party. But if you go to a house where there's a funeral going on, people are mourning, and you show up to help, um, I think that's a lot more appreciated.
Yeah, yeah. Just from a personal side, there might be more gratification in that. Um, it's I hate to say that Pixar got it right. There's a little bit of, I've got to choke down a little something here when I say that. But they put out this animated film called Inside Out. So the progression of Pixar films is, toys have emotions and cars have emotions, and well, you finally get to Inside Out, and its emotions have emotions. Um, and so it's from the inside of this little girl's head, and there's all of these different emotions. And so as she's experiencing things, these little kind of personifications of her emotions are having an ongoing dialogue together, and they're on their own little journey inside her brain as I think the bigger story is their family is moving from one place to another. Um, and there's the character called Joy that sort of is the main character and is supposed to make her happy all the time. And she's kind of like, we probably all have someone in our life who doesn't like conflict, or who thinks that by stopping an argument you've brought in peace. And so rather than allowing an important but hard discussion to take place and to actually come to light and happen, they go, no, let's all just act like we're happy, and they kind of silence everyone. So the Joy character is kind of like that. She just wants everything to be happy, everyone to be happy. And anytime there's a slight upset, she does her best to go over there and make that stop. Well, at one point, the girl runs away from home and gets depressed. And it's the sadness character. I forget her name. Emily, do you remember her name?
It's sadness.
It's sadness? Okay. They're real creative with that. Uh, yeah, she goes over there and wraps her arms around her, kind of just cries with her. Um, and from that deep point of sorrow, it's kind of cathartic, where the sorrow cleanses the wound, and then it heals, and then she gets better, and the thing progresses. But I think that's kind of what Solomon is saying, where in a sense, I mean, maybe this could be our way of understanding what he's saying. There's a sense in which, by embracing lament, which is our other word for the class, by embracing lament, there is a way of naming something and moving on, and putting it under Scripture and the testimony of God. That is better than simply always going happy, happy, joy, joy every time something bad happens. I think probably if you've grown up in the States, you may not have suffered a lot, at least in comparison to a global scale of some of the tragedies that have happened in other countries. And so for us to talk about difficult things becomes very uncomfortable, because that's not normal for us, as much as it is in other places. I mean, imagine growing up in Rwanda, and hearing someone preach about love your enemy, or love your neighbor, or pray for those who persecute you, right? For us, we go, oh yeah, love your enemy. And I don't personally really have enemies, right? There's people I wouldn't want to take a road trip with, but I don't feel like there's somebody that if I turn my back, like their family would kill my family. And so I don't know what that's like. So, for me, it's easy to go, yeah, love your enemy, pray for those who persecute you. But for someone growing up, through the genocide, that'd be a much more difficult teaching for them to go through. And so,
Brian,
yes,
Brian,
At a party too, I think the difference probably you'd rather go there is because at a party people's having fun and they're basically playing a role. At a
Mhm.
funeral, they can see the reality that everything's going to wind up in death eventually.
Yeah. Yeah. I think celebrations and parties are important. I think it's good to have
Right.
moments where we commemorate and we celebrate, the passing of time or an achievement of some kind. But there are people who obviously just live in the moment of the party,
You
and
don't
nothing happens.
you don't necessarily see the truth of life.
Right, right. You see the glitz and the glamour, the fine foods, and um, it's really funny when people eat Middle Eastern food. They so if you go to Fadi's or Damazi's or any place like this, what you are eating is actually their party food. You're not eating their daily food. So Middle Eastern daily food is very simple, very basic, typically vegetarian, very cheap, and so they'll eat that stuff every single day. But then when someone's kid gets married or a new baby is born, they kill. It's not a proverbial fatted calf. They kill an actual fatted calf, and it's 3 days of just gorging yourself till you can't move anymore. Um, so yeah, I think if we live in the house of the party, so to speak, we are hiding ourselves from reality. And so again, we're seeing him stack up very similar concepts of there's sadness or there's seriousness or there's something here, and then there's this other side in these six maxims. So number verse 3 says sorrow is better than laughter. So kind of a repetition of verse 2. Sadness of face, by sadness of face, the heart is made glad. This is kind of what I was saying with my Pixar analogy. Verse 4, the heart of the wise is in the house of mourning, but the heart of fools is in the house of mirth. Um, and, and so again, he's kind of stacking these up like dominoes, where it's not, he's teaching six distinct individual truths. I think all of these are kind of the same concept, which is, and this goes back to a couple chapters before, there's a time for everything. There is a time for sorrow. There is a time for sadness. And if our quest for the meaning of life, our quest for purpose and all of this is wrapped up in our cheap definition of happiness, which is the party scene, Solomon's saying that's a foolish thing. You're a fool who does this. He literally says it. The heart of the fool is in the house of mirth. And so I don't think he would say it's wrong to party or it's wrong to laugh or it's wrong to have a good time. We see him say that a number of times. But he's kind of drawing out some meaning here from his test cases. And he keeps hitting this again and again of sadness versus mirth. Verse 6, for as the crackling of thorns under a pot, so is the laughter of fools. This also is vanity. This is, if you think of, I don't know how many of you have built fires or cooked over a wood fire, but there are particular kinds of woods that are great for this because they burn in a very stable way. And then as a young kid camping or as a Boy Scout camping, we used to love to take stuff and throw it on the fire that would make lots of flame or lots of sound. Like you throw something in that's really crackly and it's exciting, it's fun. But if the purpose of fire is to keep me warm and not burn me, or to heat my food and not burn it, throwing a pile of wet leaves because they'll smoke, that's terrible. Throwing in thorns because they'll crackle and make this fun sound, it's fun unless you light your dinner on fire and then you're hungry. And so, a fool laughing is like this. It seems so fun and delightful, but it's really just vanity. I took my kids to Chuck E. Cheese. I hadn't been to a Chuck E. Cheese probably since I was a kid, and I took them to a Chuck E. Cheese for a school fundraiser. And it's like a casino, or what I've heard from people describing casino. In that there's always just stuff like dinging and dinging. Like there could be no children in Chuck E. Cheese, and everything's at 100 decibels, just lights and dinging and flashing. And Savannah had some tokens or coins or however you make the stuff work. And she goes up to this one and she's so excited. And it looks like the face of a clock. And it looks really cool. You know, you sit in this basket, and you're on one of the arms, like the hour hand. And there's this basket. So I put her in and put the seatbelt on, and just very slowly it rotates down and comes back the other side. And then it goes back again. And it might take, 10, 15 seconds to very slowly make that pendulum swing. And you could see Savannah's face. She must have been 4 or 5 years old. She's so excited. And then it's just not barely moving. And you could just see her face kind of, get sullen, right? This is the laughter of fools. It seems so exciting. And then you realize, oh, there's nothing here. This is just emptiness. In other news, I don't know how anybody works at one of those places. So he continues on verse 7, surely oppression drives the wise into madness, and a bribe corrupts the heart. Better is the end of a thing than its beginning, and the patient in spirit is better than the proud in spirit. So all of these are kind of just general admonishments or general observations that he's seen. And verse 9, I think this was the one that really speaks to what's happening currently. And I don't specifically mean the riot itself, but I'll read the verse and we'll talk. It says, be not quick in your spirit to become angry, for anger lodges in the heart of fools. So don't be quick to jump on the bandwagon of anger, because that's where fools lodge. That's where they live. I was talking with a brother at church this last week, and he's from another country. He grew up, he's kind of been, he grew up in China, moved to the States, moved away for work, came back. And in the time where he moved away for work in his adult life and then came back, he said, America changed so much. He mentioned the Asian community used to, none of them own guns. And now so many of them own guns because they are afraid. Now, I come from a gun culture. My dad has, 60, 70 plus guns. I don't have nearly that many, but I have, more than my hands can hold, which is ideal. And so in my culture, like, that's a very normal thing. You don't want to be the one guy without the gun. You don't want to be the one house that's unprotected. But in Asian culture, that's not a very Asian way of thinking about life. And so, but he's saying basically, like, the culture and the, whether it's, you want to blame media, politicians, people on the street, whatever, it's induced this fear in people. And so I think you see this in social media, of course, this instant rage that everyone gets into. The shooting that happened in Georgia with the jogger. Of course, it actually happened. One of the difficult things of how it was handled was, the media had the video for a month before they released it. They released it for maximum incendiary value. They could have released it weeks earlier, but they waited a month before they let it go. And they had other videos. So first they released the video showing the tragic moment where he was shot. Then they released a few weeks later. So after they build up the rabble, they pushed everybody one way. Then they start releasing the other videos of him in a construction site. And we don't know what he was doing, but now they're trying to make him look shady and like he's not so innocent. And so now they're trying to sway everyone back and forth. But the rage that immediately boils up on either of these sides is so instantaneous. As an American, I find this very dangerous and appalling that we want to try people in the court of public opinion. We are a nation of laws, and this is something we should be grateful for. But there is a sense in which everything is triggering to everybody. And I think it's heightened in a time like right now, where people have a lot more time to sit around and be on social media than they normally do. a lot more time to just repost articles and all this kind of thing. But Solomon's instruction in light of this, I mean, he is not minimizing bad things that happen at all. He is a realist. He's not an optimist. He is a realist. He sees the situation as it is. In fact, he's about to talk about righteous people and unrighteous people and why does it happen the way that it does. So he's not saying be happy when things are happy and get angry when things, call for it. He's saying don't rush to anger, in spite of the fact that he knows that there's all this stuff that's unjust in the world. He is aware of the injustice. In fact, he speaks out about the injustice, but he says, don't rush to anger. That's where the fool lives. Did anybody have any thoughts about that? I think I saw Matt moving, but he was muted.
I think many times people sit around and wait and watch social media to see how they're supposed to react to things according to what their friends are saying or what the news reports are. They don't immediately have their own opinion. They just wait for someone else to lead them, like the mob.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the people leading the discussions right now, it's the media, and whether you watch a left-leaning or a right-leaning media source, they all have an agenda. And honestly, media is about marketing. It's not about reporting information. It's about getting clicks. And so if you look at like how titles are phrased, they're very non-definitive, so that they can plead the fifth. Was he innocent? Was he guilty? Should this happen? They'll throw these questions out there, and so it's designed to incite you.
That's why I don't watch the news.
I think one of the other things that we've seen happen, and one of the reasons to not rush to anger, like Solomon's saying, is because so often our media outlets, and both sides do it, they frame an issue and leave out something really key. And so everybody gets really bent out of shape, and then, oh, that's not actually what happened.
Mm-hmm.
And so you end up looking really foolish for having been so bent out of shape about something that really wasn't that big a deal. I mean, that I'm not saying that's the case here, but it's certainly happened a number of times, enough that you get gun shy for sure.
Right. Well, that's kind of been the problem with coronavirus, is because the media is so, you're about to die from this. Okay, now you're about to die from that. At a certain point, you just go, all right, you're crying wolf. And then it turns out coronavirus seems to be a little more serious. And they happen, a blind squirrel finds a nut. They happen to get it right. But everyone was slow to listen because of that. But in spite of this, right, we have to be shrewd and know people are playing us. People are going to play. I was talking with Christy last night about this. When the whole Black Lives Matter movement started, there was a counter protest. There was a protest in Dallas. There was a counter protest. There was an African-American man who shot a police officer. And I said, okay, the media is playing the information, and people are so unaware that we're being played that we're breaking down on racial issues, which it's a problem. I'm not saying it's not a problem. But in that case, this African-American, he had served in the military. And so one of the stories that got buried was how poorly we are helping out our veterans when they return, because he clearly had, yes, he was part of one of these groups, but they also found out, he had some mental health problems as well that had been unresolved, that he hadn't been taken care of, that should have been taken care of medically. But then the second side of it was the police used a drone and an explosive. I thought, okay, everyone who's on the pro-police side is going, yay, they got him. And everyone who's on the anti-police side, they're like, man, they gunned down another black man. But because everyone's focused on white and black, no one's focusing on the fact that our own police used a drone and an explosive. Now, I'm not a pacifist. I'm not against the police enforcing the law, and I'm a realist. Sometimes they have to shoot people. I get this. But like our police being militarized, that's bad for everybody. But because of the way things are playing, the way the media is playing us, it's so much easier to go, hey, aren't you upset that it's a black man? Aren't you upset that it's a white man? Aren't you upset that, like, it's like they're whispering in our ear, just trying to fan those flames. So we need to be wise that this is happening, but two, we need to be obedient to the text, which is don't rush to anger.
One thing I wanted to throw into about everything that you're saying. I'm with you. I'm following with you the whole way. When you said like the news will lead you to these conclusions without actually saying it, but they've drawn the whole picture that they want you to attain without actually saying it, right?
Yes.
I'm with you. That's the thing that I love about the Bible, because the Bible doesn't do that. It doesn't just lead you around in circles. It points you directly to the truth, right? It gives you exactly what you're looking for. And I think that's why, with all the things that you said, I think people should be fleeing the mainstream media in droves, and they should be running to the Bible as a result, like, because that is the source of all truth. And the MSM, they're giving you nothing but confusion. And we know that Satan, who's the god of this world, is also the god of confusion. That's why nobody could figure out what's going on, you know? So I think you run away from all of these confusing sources of half-truths, and you run to the source of all truth.
Right. Yeah, somebody with this latest killing, before any of the facts had come out, someone sent me a message. Hey, what do you think about this? Sent me an article and sent me a thing. The question of, what do you think? And my response was, we don't know enough to draw a conclusion. I mean, I'm sad every time anyone dies. That is a tragedy, right? That's a reminder that we all die. That's a reminder of our sin. That's a reminder to me of my sin and the havoc it's wreaked in my own life. So I'm sad, even if someone is guilty as they can be, I'm sad when they die. At the same time, I'm a realist. I mean, biblically, I'm a realist. The wages of sin is death. I've sinned, I'm going to die. He sinned, he's going to die. You've all sinned, this is part of it. Now, we shouldn't just let injustice go on in the world because, oh, well, we're all sinners, we're all going to die. But I said, look, there's so many factors here that we don't know about yet. I mean, yes, the image of a policeman with his knee on someone's neck, this is angering, particularly if that person's in handcuffs. But I said, look, read the story. He's on drugs, and then he died. One of the reasons why people try to make drugs illegal is because they are so dangerous. And you can die if you overdose on drugs. And so, did the police kill him? Did the drugs kill him? Let's at least find out that question before we fire up the mob to go after, one person or the other.
Brian, what I don't understand, when I grew up, and I'm not supposed to go back, but there were several of my relatives on the police force, and they always had the rule that to shoot to wound, not to kill.
Yeah.
And now it seems like they just, as many bullets as they can put in a person, they will.
Yeah.
It
goes back to the fear. I mean, it's not just citizens that have fear. Officers have fear as well. And I think, several generations ago, there was a certain kind of courage of, let's be a little more patient. Let's let this sort itself out. And I think now people are kind of shooting first and asking, literally shooting first and asking questions later, but also metaphorically, like in the media, we shoot first and then ask questions later without realizing, what if someone is innocent? Can people still get a fair trial in our country anymore? These aren't biblical issues, but these are certainly social issues we should all feel strongly about. Is if I were the one who somehow got accidentally mixed up in something, I would want the law to be my judge, not Facebook to be my judge. And if I'm guilty according to the law, fine, I should be punished, but not just because Facebook ran a poll and enough people shared an article and then they go, oh, well, this article wasn't true. We're sorry. Yeah, but my life is already ruined by it, And so that's the kind of thing that's happening now. All right. So this next verse is kind of on par with that. Verse 10 says, "Say not, why were the former days better than these? For it is not your wisdom to ask this." I think a lot of times we get the impression that, oh man, there's the good old days and everything was right as rain back then. And I think we all agree our world is crazy now, is hugely broken and needs to be fixed. But I guarantee you, there was someone in my mother's generation that said, don't you remember the good old days, back in the 50s? And there was somebody in the 50s who said, man, don't you remember the good old days back in the 20s before, all of this other stuff? And there's someone in the 20s who said, don't you remember, the 1890s? And every time we think back, but sin is always in full effect down here on earth until God sets everything right. And so there's no point in human history where things were correct and everything was great other than prior to the fall. And that was kind of just a ticking time bomb. So yeah, very short window where everything was okay. And then it went to mass chaos 3 chapters later, or several chapters later. God's flooding the earth because everything went so badly. And so it's easy to tell ourselves right now is bad and I feel bad about the way of the world. But man, just a while back, things were so good. And, my mom and I go back and forth on certain social issues. And she, of course, longs for the good old days. And I had to say, look, in this time period, this is when free love was a thing. And all of these, I just list, I go down a laundry list of societal sins at the time. And you just see her go, huh, yeah, you're right. But in our mind, like we've kind of cleaned up the past and that was a better, happier time. I want to move down a couple verses because we're kind of running out of time. In verse 14, he says, "In the day of prosperity, be joyful." So see, Solomon is not anti-joy. "And in the day of adversity, consider, God has made the one as well as the other so that man may not find out anything that will be after him." So God gives us good days. God allows us to have bad days. Both of these are from him. When Job and his friends are going round and round about the cause of all of his trials, Job finally says, look, will I receive good from God and not bad as well? There's this mentality that we have that, well, God only allows acceptable things to happen to us. And then when we write our worldview on that, obviously that's not realistic because we live in a fallen world where sin is reigning. And so that's not the real picture of how life is going to be. We're going to have good. We're going to also have bad. And so in the day of prosperity, be joyful. But in the day of adversity, we have to remember that God has made both of these. Of course, in the New Testament teaching, there's lots of teaching on patience and suffering and going through trials, producing righteousness, and this being the way that God refines us. And it's easy, particularly in those, we always recognize it in retrospect. We're like, oh, right, this is what God was doing all along. He was refining me, and that's why this whole trial happened. But then the moment the next trial hits, it's, oh my gosh, why is this happening? Where is God? Has he forgotten me? Now, one of the kind of not contradictory but paradoxical statements in this passage is, so he makes an observation in verse 15. He says, "In my vain life, I have seen everything. I've seen it all. There's a righteous man who perishes in his righteousness, and there's a wicked man who prolongs his life in his evil doing." I remember some radio station was interviewing some guy who was 105, and they said, "What's your secret to longevity?" And he took off his mask and he had another puff of his cigarette, and he goes, "I don't know. I smoke a pack of cigarettes a day." And so this is the kind of irony that Solomon is noting, is that there's the righteous guy. He follows all of the rules. I remember growing up there's this guy at our church died of a heart attack at 38 or 30. I mean, real young. And he was like a marathon runner and drank carrot juice and just every healthy thing that was available to him. Like that was him. And he died super young. And then we had somebody else that, would eat like a cake a day and they lived to, I think they're probably still kicking around. So this is not just Solomon saying life is not fair. He is noting that it doesn't always happen according to plan. All the way into the time of the New Testament, this is a common way of thinking. This is why when Jesus and his disciples are walking and seeing the man who's born blind, the first question they ask, which to them seems like an obvious question, who sinned, this man or his parents? Tell us which one. It's one of them. That's obvious. And so it's this kind of, if you do this, God will give you this. If you do that, God will give you that. It turns God into a mechanical being, like a vending machine or a slot machine, where I put in my service of Sabbath keeping, for the Jewish system of the sacrifices of this, I do. I pull the slot, and out from that, you should bless me. Hey, good night, my little man.
Night, Daddy.
Can you tell everyone hello
Bye.
and good night?
Good night.
Right, God is not a mechanical cake a day, Dr. White, yeah, something like that. God is not a mechanical being, and he seems to be really offended every time his people treat him that way. I mean, read Isaiah 1. Who has ordered this trampling of my courts? Your new moons, your Sabbaths, your feasts, I hate. And so definitively, things that it seems like God has been the one saying, well, you should do these things, because of their mechanical way of doing them, God now hates them. So he observes this, and then he gives a weird statement. Be not overly righteous, and do not make yourself too wise. Why should you destroy yourself? What do you make of that? He also gives the flip side. Don't be overly wicked. Don't be a fool. Why should you die before your time?
I think a lot of times it's easy to put your standards before God and then your self-righteousness.
Yeah.
But he's in control.
I've always gone back and forth on that, if that's talking about self-righteousness or if that, I mean, growing up Baptist, I knew a lot of people who were righteous to the point of being obnoxious about it. And I don't know if that's what he's referring to there. Yes, you're very righteous. You can sit there all by yourself and consider it because no one else wants to talk to you.
Yeah. I think y'all are right. We can take our own righteousness, our own merit, and this becomes where our righteous anger burns. But our own righteousness is, one, filthy rags, two, hypocrisy, because, we will stress, growing up, the hemline of skirts and the appropriateness or inappropriateness of the lengths thereof, and not at all talk about love or grace or bearing one another's burdens or any number of very, very clear commands in Scripture. So I think one of the, again, if we look at the book kind of as we sit back and think about what's the meaning of the book, one of the things we talked about last time was that, it's not enough to have something, you have to also be able to enjoy it. And so Solomon's middle was kind of this middle way of don't be impoverished and don't be rich. Don't have no time and don't have all the time. There's this middle thing of you have to work, you have to do some stuff, but you also have to enjoy what you're doing. And I think he's applying it now to morality in a sense, but I think it's more a human standard of morality where you can be so law keeping, you can be so Spartan, so ascetic that you turn everything evil. In fact, in the early New Testament period times, this was a huge problem for people because they thought that the world was evil. They thought that matter was evil. It's called Gnosticism, but that was one of their that was one of their beliefs. And it kind of took two branches. One side that says, well, since everything is evil, let's just enjoy it all and have a great time, party, woohoo. The other side said, no, 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 let's never do any of it. And so they had this such a strict thing where now they're saying things are bad that God hasn't said are bad. And that's a problem when you're saying this is bad, don't touch this, and God hasn't said that. Now with both of these, with the one of don't be righteous, and then in verse 17, don't be overly wicked, neither be a fool. There's sort of a stick with each of these. In verse 16, why should you destroy yourself? And in verse 17, why should you die before your time? But in verse 18, he gives us a promise. He says, it's good that you should take hold of this, and that from that, withhold not your hand, for the one who fears God shall come out from both of them. So I think the both of them is referring to being overly righteous and destroying yourself, or being overly wicked and dying before your time. So Solomon puts fear of God as the balancing idea between these two, where if I fear God, I won't be kind of pseudo-righteous, and I also won't be living in sin. Verse 20, he says, surely there's not a righteous man on the earth who does good and never sins. So he's a realist. There's no way to be perfect. But if I live in the fear of God, I'm going to stay away from, as a lifestyle, I'm going to stay away from both of those extremes, while at the same time understanding I am a very frail human that sins, fairly regularly. Confession time. So finally, he gives another kind of practical comment, which is, don't take to heart all the things that people say, lest you hear your servant cursing you. Your heart knows how many times that you yourself have cursed others. There is such a desire to know, to surveil, even in these days. Like, we can track people by their phone. We can monitor conversations. I mean, bosses look in on employees. And so sometimes we always want to know everything. And Solomon's saying, hang on, take a step back. Maybe knowing everything that's said about you is not the best thing, right? Because you're going to hear in a moment, you're going to hear someone say something that may not be true, right? They might be saying it just to impress a friend or to make themselves look good or whatever. And it's not necessarily a true feeling, but you're going to take that as a truth that now it becomes a wound for you. If you read the Chronicles of Narnia in one of the books, I think it's The Magician's Nephew or Voyage of the Dawn Treader. Magician's Nephew or Voyage of the Dawn Treader, where one of the kids is looking in this, she's supposed to be going into this house and getting this particular spell out of a book. And then she starts looking through. And one was to be able to hear things that are said about you. And as she does this spell, she's able to hear a conversation of these girls talking badly about her, and she's offended. And of course, Aslan, who's kind of the Christ figure in the story, comes in and rebukes her for this. And it's kind of in tune with what's happening here of, don't try to hear everything, because you're going to hear someone say something bad. And you yourself, he's kind of saying, like, come on, be honest. You yourself know that you've whispered things against others. And so you can't take it to heart, and you can't make enemies over what's whispered about you. We're going to kind of skip down to the closing section, and he has a lot to say about women. I don't think we should take this as this is the Bible's view on all women. Okay, and I think there's a couple of key words that would link this to his own experience. So let's remind ourselves, how many wives and concubines does Solomon have? Anybody?
Altogether, 1,000.
Just a couple.
Yeah, just a few. And so, everyone goes, well, if you're thinking like Western style, we get married because we find meaning and purpose and friendship and a partner, if you're thinking that, like, that's impossible, obviously, for him to do that with 1,000 women. A lot of these are treaty marriages. This happened in medieval Europe and many, many places around the world where, I would marry off Emily to, the king of Poland, because now Poland and France would have peace together so long as we both, so long as they live and stay happily married. And so their marriage is literally holding together a treaty between two countries. So Solomon had a lot of this happening. That was part of his claim to fame, was that he was able to bring peace throughout the region. So with a lot of his wives becomes these very political marriages. And in this section, he's not talking about women as a category. He's talking about the schemes that he has suffered from. I'll be there in a second. And so obviously someone who marries 1,000 people or is with 1,000 people for political expediency, many of them have an agenda, obviously, to represent their country, their family, their tribe's interests, if you will. And so in verse 26, he says, I find something more bitter than death, the woman whose heart is snares and nets. We also know, again, if we think of this book being written towards the end of his life and him looking back, in so many of the Proverbs, it's my son, heed my words. Don't turn aside to the strange. There's all these warnings about the strange woman. And then he doesn't take his own advice. His heart is turned towards worshiping other gods and, paying homage to them. And it's through a lot of these marriages, which is exactly what he had kind of warned against. And so now we're seeing him, I think, revisit this particular concept again. So I don't think this is the Bible talking about all women in general, but I think he is mentioning that. I mean, again, I think this is his experience, obviously, with 1,000 people, 1,000 women that he was involved with. And so he gives a very stern warning, her heart is snares and nets and whose hands are fetters. So he has very strong feelings about that.
Is that where the expression, the ball and chain, comes from?
I don't know. These things are too high for me. Which is what he said just like a verse ago, so. Yeah. So he's really, there's this sense of randomness to the chapter, but it's really not that random. So the first part of the chapter, he's clearly talking about sadness versus this kind of short-term happiness, and how embracing sadness and the realism of that is key to real happiness, I think he would go on to say. And then we see some of his advice for dealing through sorrows, and then kind of at the end, he gets really close to home for himself of a lot of his sorrows have come through, I think, his marriages or non-marriages to concubines that he had. So on that thrilling note, does anybody have a prayer request?
Great segue.